fire service, so I was kind of used to doing this type of work. It was municipal, but nevertheless a long time in the fire service. So come a couple weeks before Thanksgiving in October of 2014, we had the first weather event. It rained about an inch, at least down in the Sacramento Basin, so I was sure there was quite a bit more rain up there. Took off work, shot up there, did a little prep work, and began to light 6 of the 20 fires. And it'll be significant later that, and I didn't notice at the time, but those fire piles, those slash piles that I had built, were kind of in a row, not really purposely, but that's kind of where all the deadfall was that I cut and piled. And it covered about 120 yards, and it actually went out onto federal property. I was burning out on federal property that first night. So anyway, inch of rain, was reasonably warm, and I burnt all night long. I only got 6 piles down, cleaned up, went home, and went back to work. The next Thursday, a week before Thanksgiving, another rain event, and now we got about 2 inches of rain, so I knew I could go up and just light them because there was just no danger of the fire spreading. And even though the American Fire to Burn bought everything else there was to burn up there. So got out of my truck after driving for a couple hours that Friday before Thanksgiving, and lit the remaining 13 fires off, slash piles off. I worked them all day long, and at about 8:30 at night I got pretty exhausted. And the first night I was up there a week earlier, I'd slept out on the chase lounge chair in front of one of the fires because it was warm enough, but it got real cold. I was expecting it to drop below 0 that night, so I got in the back of my truck and a sleeping bag, and I went to sleep. I was going to make it through the night. I didn't even worry about tending the fires because it was getting really, really cold. And about 11:30 at night, I hear the first sound, and it was, from what I could tell, coming up from the west, and it was a scream, a holler, and a growl kind of all mixed together. And I think I sent you a link to Ontario localization. Did you get a chance to listen to that?
I did.
Yeah.
Let me, and so what you heard was this. So you get up there, and what happens next? You start lighting the fires?
The second Friday up there, I got all the fires lit, and it's kind of, I think it was pretty close to 0 when I finally, bedded down, and kind of an inversion. It was weird. The rain had stopped. Everything was soaking wet, and it felt like the pressure got real high, because what happened is the smoke that was generated from these fairly large piles, 13 large piles, wasn't any more than about 12 feet off the deck. It was just thick as pea soup, London fog. And as I was bedded down, as I woke up, I could actually look out the window of my camper shell and see that the long line of glow, the fires were kind of glowing and flickering. Not a lot of real heavy flame, but nevertheless, it lit the passenger side of my truck up a little bit, and I could see the fires and realized they weren't going anywhere. But I was awakened right at about 11:30 by the first scream. And I say scream, it had no flavor at all of a human scream, and it was more of a roar, growl, howl type of noise. And the first thought that came as I was waking up is that somebody had set a trap for a bear, and the damn bear was caught in a trap. And I'm thinking, man, there's not much I can do to help out because I didn't have a firearm with me. And not to mention, I wasn't too keen on walking out in that forest alone, armed or otherwise. And I'm thinking, okay, this is one. And then within, a couple of 15 seconds, I hear another one. And my estimate on distance, it was pretty close to a mile, 3/4 of a mile away to the south and west of where I was at. And it didn't take me very long to start worrying because I could tell that this thing was moving. Whatever it was moving. It was screaming at my direction about every 15 seconds, and that continued as it approached my position for about 20 minutes. It took 20 minutes to get to me. So I don't think it was moving very fast, but it was definitely coming my way. And what I kind of neglected to tell you is when I pulled into the campsite that day to start those fires, I parked my Ford pickup truck right in front of a C-train container that we store our chairs and tents and that kind of stuff in. It's just a C-train container, about a 20-footer. Well, that animal screamed all the way into the camp, and it landed behind the sea train container, and I know now probably about 40, 50 feet on the far side of the container relative to where my truck was. And it sat there and screamed again. It never really stopped that 15-second cadence. And again, I don't know if you can imagine how scared I was. I didn't have to set the stage a little clearer. A lot of times my Ford pickup truck would lock. The door would lock as I got out of it because the armrest or elbow rest on the door was constantly getting clicked. I was getting out of the car, getting out of the truck and locking my door. I had a hide key, but a couple of the unknowns, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when this animal was screaming. I was worried about the truck door being locked. I didn't really know where I'd set my keys because I used them to unlock the container. And we had several locks on the property that I'd used. So I just really didn't know where my keys were, nor did I know if my driver's side door was unlocked. And just absolutely unnerved. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a sidearm. I didn't have all my clothes. I didn't have my shoes. And this thing was just raising Cain with me. So during that process, while that animal was stationary, actually while I was walking up, I phoned my oldest son, who happened to be in the hospital emergency room with his son with respiratory distress, a 1.5-year-old baby. And he wasn't in with a doctor. I said, Billy, I'm in a pickle up here. Something's outside and it's big and it's screaming. So I described it. And he said, there's 4 North Americans. There's only 2 in your area, and you're not describing any of them. So I can't really help you with what it is, Pop. So realizing, and we lost, we were texting and we were phoning during that period. It was kind of bad reception. I kept breaking the connection. So I think about 6 or 7 minutes went by with the animals. From what I could tell, was stationary and very loud. And all of a sudden, the volume dropped in half. And I now know what that was caused from. An animal turned its head and began to leave the area in kind of a real shallow V. It came in on an angle to where I was at and now was headed to due east toward French Meadows Reservoir, or at least that direction. But it never stopped screaming every 15 seconds. Decidedly more quiet, though, Wes, because its head wasn't turned at me. So I heard it walk all the way to where I couldn't hear it anymore. And I actually heard the last scream kind of disappear. And I'm thinking, okay, I got fires burning. I think I'm going to be okay. And this thing has decided to leave. Well, in seconds, it turned around and began to come back. And it sounded just like it did when it approached the first time. It was stronger and stronger vocalizations, 15 seconds apart. And now, I know I was getting more scared as the clock ticked, but this animal sounded a lot more aggravated and a lot more furious as it walked back in for the second time. It again lands behind the sea train container, pretty much where I thought it was the first time, and screamed for probably maybe a half dozen more times from that position, and then went quiet. And I'm now like as scared as I've ever been in my life. I never experienced anything in my whole career in the fire service that matched the terror I was experiencing at this point. I literally could hear nothing but my own heartbeat on my neck, behind my ears. It was, I'm actually having a little bit of an effect right now. It was just pounding. My pulse was pounding, my jaw was chattering, and I'm thinking, my God, what am I going to do? And I'm not usually... It's not difficult for me to make a decision. It's never been in my life. And I'm trying to decide what my best odds are. Do I try to hunker down? Do I try to get out of this vehicle and get into my cab, not knowing if the door's locked, not knowing where my keys are? My truck's pointed the wrong way. And this thing sounds big enough to pick my truck up and tip it over if it needed to. So after 3 minutes, I think it was about 3 minutes, the screaming started again, but the animal had moved broadside to my pickup truck on the driver's side. And what I'll tell you now, I didn't know at the time. It took me, weeks to piece it all back together, to try to rationalize and analyze what had happened to me. But the fires, like I told you, were all on the driver's side of my vehicle on about a 120-yard line, roughly a line. And between the sea train container and my pickup truck being kind of nosed into each other, there was a shadow line, basically a cone of shadow that the flicker from the flames didn't penetrate. My truck was basically creating a shadow for this animal to hide in. Swung around to the driver's side. Now it's pretty close to my truck because I can feel the percussion of the voice. Whereas I don't know how to describe it any different than that. A lot of times I've told this story to my friends, and they said, well, was it pushing your vehicle? And I said, no, and there's no thought of that. It was just hitting me with enough sound that either I was moving or the vehicle was moving from the percussion of the sound. And if it was angry coming in, it was really angry coming back. And as it quieted and changed position, it now was, you couldn't do a monster movie any better than what was going on in front of me. So I finally came to grips that I realized if I got caught in the back inside the, shell of my truck, just kind of a flimsy fiberglass shell, I had no chance. This thing it would just take me to task. Didn't think I'd do a lot better on the outside of the truck, but I opted for that action. So I'm pretty sure after I flipped the broken window gate on the back of my truck up, it never made another noise. I don't have any recollection of another sound. And obviously, since this, I've done a lot of research, a lot of listening to videos, and thankfully I found your station. I had to weasel over the top of the tailgate. I have slip-on shoes. I didn't have boots on. I had slip-on shoes. I got into those, and the animal, I would guess, probably was 30 or 40 paces away from me, but I couldn't get myself to turn to look at it. Now, there wasn't much light. There was light from the fires, but not on where that animal voice was coming from. So an odd behavior that I did, and I don't even know, can't explain exactly why I did it, but I went past the door of my truck without even touching it, without touching the knob or checking to see if it was open. And I happened to have left my lunch, an icebox, igloo on the front of my truck, and I swiped it off the front of my truck as if that made any difference, right, in this circumstance. I swiped it off the hood of my truck and then backed straight up, not wanting to turn toward the animal, not even know if it was there, to tell you the truth. And the door was open, got into the cab thinking it was coming at me at any second. And now this all happened in probably 5-6 seconds. This wasn't a lot of time on the outside of that truck. Opened the door, got in, literally put my hand down on my bench seat, and the keys were where I normally left them, by my right thigh. But I just barely got the truck started. It was below zero. It's a Ford. Glow plugs weren't working very well. Obviously, I locked the doors. Didn't think that mattered. I thought whatever was could come through the door easily. I didn't think I was safe yet. So that the truck just barely started in that cold weather, and had to do a K-turn to get out of there, trying not to hit trees. And I was pretty excited, but trying to almost go slow motion so I wouldn't make a mistake. Got the vehicle turned around. I thought, I'm still not out of here. This thing could hold on to the truck by the sound of what I was hearing. Turned and went down about 1/8 of a mile of real rough access road into this campsite. Went through our gate, wasn't locked. I hadn't locked it behind myself. And the next obstacle I was facing was I had to turn backwards toward the animal on Road 43, another dirt road that takes you from Mosquito Ridge Road over to not French Meadows, but Robinson Flat Campground. I had to go back kind of toward the animal. I had to go a total of a half mile to get clear of our campsite, and the animal had about 200 yards to cover that same distance. So anyway, none of this ever happened. I just was able to drive away. And as soon as I got up to Robinson Flat Campground, I'm now up at about 6,700 foot elevation. I can get an AT&T signal, and I called my son, who's still likely in the hospital with his boy, and said, hey, wake my younger son up. I knew Billy couldn't come up because of his boy being sick, but I had to wake my younger son up and get some guns and tell him that I'd be at his house at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're coming back up to get my generator and my steel skills, or chainsaws and my tools and all this stuff I was using to straighten away the campsite. And that's kind of the end of the story. There's a little more that I want to tell you about the proximity. As I told you that this fire started on Forest Service land in Devil's Basin. And after reading Jeff Meldrum's book, he makes a distinction or a connection between geographical locations that have the word devil in them. And so the fire started in Devil's Basin. There's a rock outcropping that's well known called Devil's Thumb. And these are now like 5 to 10 miles away from our property. And then another 6 or 7 miles away as the crow flies to the east is Hellhole. And I believe there's another volcanic cone that's